4, 3.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Here's an agenda item. And Matt and I'm Marjorie McGee from OHA REALD and SOGI section, director of Matt.
And my name is Matt Friesen. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the REALD SOGI manager over in the Office of Equity Multicultural Services in ODHS.
Great. Here's a visual of the agenda. We'll be starting most of the first part of the meeting will be focused on basics and level setting about the RAC processes. And then we'll have an hour for breakout sessions where we get into the meat of some of the changes being proposed. Welcome. Matt, if we can do this one.
Sure, I'm happy to, and good to have you all with us this morning. For our objectives for this first RAC meeting, you can see on the slide here, we're going to emphasize a variety of things. So getting to know each other and understanding how the RAC process works, understanding sort of the what and why, the foundations of REALD and SOGI, as well as clarity on scope and the process. And then we'll start moving more into understanding the high-level key changes with the 2023 REALD SOGI RAC. So moving on after that foundational work, and then have some good time for breakout sessions and smaller group discussions that will be able to bring folks' wisdom back into this space. So once again, welcome this morning.
Thank you. So we have some housekeeping and how we work together. Colleen, would you mind? Yeah, go ahead.
This is Colleen R, right? Or
Colleen was, I need him.
okay. Yes, so everyone, we just wanted to let you know that certain disclosures under the Public Records Act applies to written materials, including the chat here and the recording of our meeting for today and on the live stream. So one of the ways we've tried to make this as safe and secure as possible is we're monitoring the waiting room, and the live stream will not include the breakout, so that when you are all discussing these things in depth with each other, that will not be recorded, so you can share more personal stories or anything that might be applicable to the process. And note that, just another note, that anything written in the chat becomes public record. So if you want to avoid mentioning full names of participants or sharing stories in the chat, that would be good, or just private messaging us would be a way to share something more privately.
Thank you. So we need to have some group agreements to get started. Really important because we have a lot of people here, a diverse group with many different opinions and different expertise as well. So first of all, raise your hand using the Zoom feature. Speak respectfully, briefly, non-repetitively. Think about how much space you may be taking up with your comments. There's a lot of time in the breakout session to share your expertise and your thoughts. So we want to really consider your positionality. You know, move up, move back, move in. If you're the type who not to speak much, and if you're the person who speaks a lot, move back a little bit. You can send a private chat to us or to respond to something and make a comment, ask questions. Just note that the chats are also part of public records, so be mindful of how much you put in the chat. If you want to say much more that you're worried about, connect with us offline. good to generate and explore our options with an open mind, listening to different points of view and maintaining a focus on equity. And then again, doing breakout, center the voices of those with the lived experience and or subject matter expertise. So if you're in a breakout and you don't know much about the topic, let the people who do know a lot speak up, and you'll learn from them in the process. Guiding principle, this is one of my favorites. I always have to think about, if we do this, or if we don't do this, what is the impact on equity? So if we have the status quo, what's the impact on equity? If we make this change, what's the impact on equity? Always have that front and center. Centering communities most impacted by health inequity is another guiding principle. Considering the practical realities of implementation, but acknowledge that equity involves system change. So it's not always making change is usually difficult, but we'd like to make it easier, as easy as possible, but it would still be difficult sometimes. And also, lastly, national standards are not the gold standard. So we have to consider what is best for Oregon, given our demographics, our population, and so on. So turn over to the other Colleen. We have two Colleen, who will talk more about the rulemaking process.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Colleen N. Our other Colleen is Colleen R. So you'll see us both talking. I am the Policy and Rules Manager for both Oregon Health Authority and Oregon Department of Human Services, ODHS. So go ahead. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I have this nice, I call it the Candyland board of how we go through the overall process and where we're sitting in it today. So as we move through on that first line, we have the engagement phase. And we've moved through community engagement, engaging like who should be at the meeting here today, who's impacted, how can we reach out in different ways, sometimes meeting people where they're at, going to their meeting and say, we're doing changes, we're doing rules about REALD and SOGI, who should be at our RAC. We talked to tribes and determine, is there a critical event? Do we need to have tribal notice? We've drafted text, which we're going to show you today. So in that second purple box right before the curve, that's where we are. You hear us using acronyms a lot. RAC is also Rule Advisory Committee. So those of you that have been selected to represent affiliations, lived experience, any number of things, you might be doing a couple of those things. Sometimes you're here for your job and your role and your position. So you're here remembering that. So after we meet and talk about the rule text and what's called the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. It's a document that we file officially with Secretary of State, and it has things on there like fiscal impact to these rule changes, and also a very important newer addition is a racial equity statement to talk about how these rule changes affect racial equity in Oregon. And so after we come to these, we're not going to have just one meeting, we're going to have several. You probably heard about that. And then we're going to review those edits internally and say, you know, what kind of comments, what can we incorporate, what can we not incorporate, if there are suggestions that go beyond OHA's required statutes. We can't do just anything. And so then we're going to move down to that next line. We're going to do the curve and we file the notice. And that's one of the documents we'll see throughout these meetings today. And then we're in the public comment period. So that yellow in the middle, we call it the public comment phase with the bulletin. And then the other public hearing, the purple, the third purple box in between the two yellow ones, is while we're in that public comment period, we have a public rule hearing, and it functions a little bit differently than a RAC. A RAC is much more engagement and talking and working together in the community. Whereas the public hearing is more for OHA to hear testimony from anyone, people that are impacted by the rules, and maybe people who are just interested in hearing what OHA is doing. So after the public comment period ends, just like after the RAC meeting, on the very left of the middle row, we're in review comments again. So every time we kind of have these people coming together to inform us what they think and advise us on the rule, we review that. and we're lawfully required to do so. And then we come down and do the curve, and we're in the finalizing phase where we file our permanent rules with Secretary of State. And what that does is, just like the name of the filing sounds, it files and makes those rules and those laws permanent. So then we post those permanent rules to the agency website, so OHA's website, and we notify all of you RAC members and interested parties. So if you're finding out about this and you're on the YouTube channel, be sure to make sure you subscribe to any kind of emails and find out and follow this. You can also go to our website, the REALD and Equity and Inclusion Division website. And then officially our rulemaking ends. But that doesn't mean that REALD and SOGI program and the effects of these rules have ends. Quite the opposite. We move more into implementation and the programmatic living in this. And we live like that until we have reason to do this whole process again. Yeah.
And,
Pause, and then we could go to the next slide. And Marjorie, do you have a comment?
yeah, there's a question.
Oh.
This illustrates one cycle of a biennial series.
Oh, so not necessarily biennial. It's all dependent on what the impetus for a rule change is. Often, especially with REALD, it's legislation, bills in this case, which we'll get into that a little bit later. That's the reason why we do rulemaking. But also sometimes it comes from, and this is, speaking to all the agencies in Oregon, it can be other things, federal regulations, it could be programmatic things, it could be that our rules are just not up to snuff. We need to make some changes. So yeah, it's not so much related to biennial, but it's most commonly, I should say, part of the implementation process for a bill from a Senate bill or a House bill, or both. Yeah, you're welcome. Great question. So what are we doing here? What is our role of the Rules Advisory Committee, or RACs? We are representing, or I'm part of the agency, so I'm not a member of the RAC. I'm a hostess for the space here. But it's an opportunity for those likely to be impacted, and that's a key statement in what we're required to do, impacted by the rules. Your job as RAC members is to use your expertise and experience to provide input, comments, and even live edits, suggestions on how the sentences should work, or advice. And we note that, and you'll see us later on kind of writing all that down and acting as scribes. RAC members have the opportunity to review the text, comment on it, and that's what we end up putting together and sending to Secretary of State. So the RAC, it's a role is advisory. So this isn't like a formal board or commission. We're not voting. We don't have to come to consensus. We want everybody's opinion. But sometimes we have opinions because we represent different areas that say, pretend we had a chocolate candy bar fee that we had to determine today, and somebody says $5 and somebody says 50 cents. Obviously we can't do both. We'd have to pick. So your advice and your opinions is really impactful. And then second bullet point, both OHA and ODHS considers RACs public meetings. And so we're offering a special YouTube link for those that are members of the public, the media, even our other agency folks, OHA and ODHS staff, because we want to protect the space in the Zoom space for the RAC members themselves. They've been selected to represent all the communities as best to our ability. We're constantly learning with that. So if you weren't selected to be on a RAC and you represent something, make sure you find your person that you could talk to, your representative up here on the RAC. And vice versa, RAC members, listen to your folks that might have advice for you to provide. And then internal content experts and program managers will discuss and thoughtfully consider all suggestions and concerns expressed by RAC members. So that's us, staff. After the RAC, OHA will finalize the proposed text, get all of your comments and get all the things ready. And this is kind of that, again, from our Candyland board, that part of the phase where we think about what is the public really telling us? Where did we get it right? Where did we get it wrong? What can we do that's within our statutory requirements? And then that goes to Secretary of State that starts the public comment period where anyone can go. So that last bullet point, the public has an opportunity, including you as RAC members or you folks that are here and watching in the YouTube link. That's your time to continue. It doesn't mean that when we end the RAC phase, the RAC members have to stop talking to us. They can continue, everybody can continue to advise us. And comments received during the public comment period may affect the final text as well. So take notes, listen to each other, because things that you hear today and at the other RAC meetings might also spurn another comment from you or change, you're thinking like, oh, I have a new idea. So yeah, it's good to listen. And then role specifically for RAC members, speak from your expertise and your lived experience. Reach out, I think I just said this, to your constituents in between RAC meetings to help shape your participation. And there will be a public comment period after the RAC closes in January for this particular rulemaking. And a little bit about our process. As I mentioned, sometimes rulemaking has one RAC, sometimes it has multiple, and we're going to have 4, it looks like. We're here today on November 17th, right before Thanksgiving. So we're getting into that holiday season. So our next RAC meeting is on December 1st after Thanksgiving, and then a couple weeks later on December 15th. And then we have a 4th RAC after the holidays of December and January. New Year on January 12th is our last RAC to tie up any loose ends. And then the public comment period goes likely into late February. And I believe this will eventually be posted too on the website. So we might even already have some stuff going for RAC number 2 because we anticipated that. And the RAC members will continue through all meetings. So they don't change, just to kind of note that. Okay, do I keep going on this one, or did a content expert want to jump in on the scope of? Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So the scope of, so it gets confusing because House Bill 3159 points to OIS 413161, I think it is. Yeah, that is 4131.161, and which is the 2134 House Bill. It points to there and says, you got to add SOGI. And then the rest of 3159 talks about the registry and requirements of providers eventually to submit data to OHA into the registry. So I want to be clear, this is the 2134 RAC, not the 3159 RAC, not about the registry, not about the repositories, not about, do providers have to submit data and how often and when and how? It's not about that. This RAC is focusing on the REALD and SOGI data collection standards, the questions and response options. What are the standards? One principle is, when we don't reduce what is already in rules, unless there was a very compelling reason from communities telling us to do that. Saying we need, the other principle is leading again with your subject matter expertise when choosing what the main element to focus on later in the breakdown. You can see we're a little bit repetitive about this, but we want to make sure. Out of scope examples that we wouldn't discuss is was mentioned earlier is the registry requirements by providers, like data collection processes, for example, making sure that people had training or that supports for data collectors. That would not be part of this. Sometimes I'll leave it at that. So it's just focus on the data collection standards, the questions and response options. There's a few other things like age when you would ask, at what age would the person be asked? Those kind of things is what this RAC is focused on. So here I turn it over to Quaker to lead us into REALD and SOGI, what and why? Where do we come from?
Thank you, Marjorie. Good morning. My name is Kweku Wilson. I'm the REALD and SOGI Data Analytics Manager, and it's an honor to join you this morning. My presentation will focus on the historical journey of REALD and SOGI implementation in Oregon. While House Bill 2134, which passed the Oregon legislature in 2013, was foundational to the implementation of REALD and SOGI data collection standards in Oregon, it is worthy to mention that there is a rich and long history of the collection of REALD and SOGI data in Oregon. And the role of community advocacy is evident at every stage of this historical journey. Communities, especially those impacted by inequities, have been and continue to be the driving force of REALD and SOGI implementation in Oregon. It is therefore imperative to center community voice in how we collect and use REALD and SOGI data to promote health equity. Among such communities include the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, often called APANO, and the Oregon Health Equity Alliance. The same communities and others were very instrumental in the comprehensive rulemaking process for developing and codifying the REALD standards in 2014. The REALD standards are also inspired by national and local best practices. Thanks, Marjorie. House Bill 2134, which passed in 2013, required Oregon Health Authority and the Oregon Department of Human Services to collect and store REALD data in all data sets that collect demographic information. But we did not get to full implementation. Oh no, next slide, please, Marjorie. Next slide, thanks. House Bill 3159, also known as the Data Justice Act, which passed in 2021, required the collection and reporting of REALD, and in addition, SOGI data to OHA from providers, CCOs, and health insurers. The law expanded the reporting requirements beyond COVID-19 to all health encounters, and we want to emphasize that. Reporting must be at least once a year, and data collectors are required to disclose to patients and members, including how the data will be used. There are requirements for respondents to answer all REALD and SOGI questions, but respondents may choose to decline to answer any specific questions, and that's okay, but we have to ask. House Bill 3159 also required OHA to develop a REALD and SOGI registry with functionality for individuals to log in and update their own information. The data reporting entities could also query the registry to determine whether a member or patient or client's data is current, that is within a year. OHA is required to create a grant program to help community partners and community-based organizations serving underserved populations to support the collection and reporting of this data. We want to emphasize, as Marjorie indicated, that this RAC will only, the text, most of the text on this slide will be out of scope for this RAC. So there will be opportunities in future to discuss the requirements of a registry and expectations of the reporting entities. We want to emphasize that some of the content here will be out of scope or is out of scope for this RAC. Next slide, please. The collection and utilization of REALD and SOGI data are important to OHA's strategic goal to eliminate health inequities. Health equity is also a core value of the agency, and the state's health policy board endorsed a common definition of health equity in 2019. The definition emphasized specific populations and priorities and recognized that historical and contemporary injustices have contributed to current health inequities. REALD and SOGI data therefore provide us tools for measurement, and the categories serve as proxies for measuring the impacts of racism and other systems of oppression. Our commitment to developing systems to collect and use REALD and SOGI data will improve our measurement and understanding of inequities and ensure we use data to ensure that we use the data to make data informed instead of data-driven decisions. And that's a very important distinction there. Collecting and using REALD and SOGI data are manifestations of data justice. And we have been informed continually by communities that the role of OHA and ODHS is to assure data equity and ensure communities can use the data to achieve data justice. That is also an important point we want to highlight in this slide. Next slide, please. As most of you may be aware, the Equity and Inclusion Division in OHA successfully developed an initial REALD and SOGI repository, and data from the repository has been used in various internal OHA projects and dashboards. We've also shared this data with CCOs and will continue to refine and share the data. We highlight a few of the OHA projects that we've utilized the repository data for on the slide. Specifically, the OHA metrics dashboard provides a sneak peek into a future where we have more complete REALD and SOGI data to inform our collective work across systems. I want to hand this back over to Marjorie to continue. I don't know, did you want us to demo the dashboard? I didn't think we wanted to do that. So yeah.
No. What I will say is that links to the dashboard are also on the website. And so encourage folks to go, maybe after this meeting, check out to them, see how REALD is working in action. And here's some more website resources too. And I'm assuming everybody knows what I'm talking about in terms of the website. Let me just do this real quick. On our rulemaking page, you see that we had, materials for today and for this spot. But down below here, we have more resources here. So check it out here. We try to consolidate and make it easy for people to find the resources. I think that's it. Turn it over. Thank you. Quite good. I just want to say anything more. Quite good.
Oh, no. I was saying
more about the REALD website resources.
Say it again. Sorry.
Do you want to say anything more about the website and resources?
Oh, no, nothing more. I think you've just covered that part of it. So I don't, but if there is any questions in the chat, I can respond to that and then maybe put a link. The links are here so that we can talk about that, but I don't have anything to add. Yeah, thanks.
So turn it over to other Colleen to go over the proposed changes.
Hello all, I am other Colleen, Colleen R. Nice to see all of your faces today. I'm just going to give a high level review of some of the work we have before us. And this is just a note that the details will be discussed during the breakout sessions. And so if you have any questions that come up for you, just know that we will have time to get to them later on. Next slide, please. I'll be focusing just for now on the REALD proposed changes and also letting you know some of what already exists in the data elements. So for race and ethnicity right now, and you guys have links to to these forms for both service and non-service based settings. Currently, there are 3 race and ethnicity questions that we ask. One is an open-ended question. How do you identify your race, ethnicity, tribal affiliation, country of origin, or ancestry? The second question is a question that has 39 categories, and it is a check all that apply question. Our final question that we ask is a primary race question. If you checked more than one category in number 2, is there one that you think of as your primary race or ethnic identity? Next slide. So there's actually a couple of different proposed changes. One is not in this slide, but the first one I'll focus on is that we're proposing adding 2 Jewish categories. And of course, you'll be discussing this in your breakout groups as to what, where exactly to put this, or so just know that this is a draft and you will be talking about this later, but where we have proposed putting it is 1 Jewish category under other white and 1 Jewish category under Middle Eastern and North African. Another proposed change that we have is adding Afro-Latino under either Hispanic and Latino, Latina, Latinx, or under Black and African American. So that's another change that you should have all in your OAR's draft PDF. Next slide. So for the language questions, we have 3 language questions, and this does depend a bit based on whether the data is being collected in a service-based or non-service-based setting. This one we're looking at is for a service-based setting. So we have, what language or languages do you use at home? In what language do you want us to communicate in person, on the phone, or virtually with you? The middle section 4B through 5B is only asked of people who speak a language other than English at home. Those who only speak English at home are only asked the first question. And then we also have a couple of questions about whether you need or want an interpreter. And if you need it or want an interpreter, what type of interpreter is preferred? Finally, our last question is, how well do you speak English? To get an idea of need for an interpreter and communication needs. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed question for the service-based setting is, did you receive interpreter services for your last appointment when you requested them? We also are asking, actually, I added one more thing. We're also proposing changing the not listed here to other sign language not listed. Please specify. Next slide, please. I want to pause here because I noticed that Dr. Dino also was raising her hand, and I wanted to give her an opportunity to mention anything I might have forgotten.
I'll wait until the breakouts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so here you can see that this is the questions in a non-service-based setting where there's not an expectation for ongoing communication with the person, with the individual. Next slide, please. I'm going to move right on with that, but as I mentioned, just anything that you want to explore more closely, you can see in the OAR's draft PDF. So for the disability questions, we currently have 9 questions, kind of measuring functional limitations in these different areas: hearing, vision, mobility, cognitive, self-care, learning, communication, independent living, and mental health, and the age acquired if someone does mention having functional limitations in one of those 9 areas. Next slide. So one of the main changes we're proposing in this section is to add an open-ended question to have it be more aligned with some of the other data elements. And so we're proposing one of these 2 open-ended questions. One is, please share if you identify as someone with a disability or as having a physical, mental, emotional, cognitive, or intellectual condition. And then we have a slightly differently worded question for the as another option that we're proposing, and you can read it there. This is where if they first identify, then they'll be asked the open-ended question as a second step. Next slide. Okay, well, that was a brief, very quick overview, and please review the OER's draft PDF if you want some specifics on these changes.
And we will be going into details on these changes, why, and then opening up for the discussion. So if you have reactions during this period, if you could like hold off on the reaction just for a second. If you can't, private chat maybe, so that staff can make sure that we capture it, and then move it forward. So here's some really high level basic, just to make sure, you know. Oh, wait a minute, I think Colin, this is you, right? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, so I can take it away with this first slide. So because not everyone has the same understanding on some of these concepts, as Marjorie mentioned earlier this morning, we're doing this quick level setting to get everybody some foundational knowledge before we move forward. And reach out to any of our state staff if you want any more info on any of these topics. We also shared a glossary of terms that's linked in this presentation. It's linked, it's also posted online. And we have a glossary and a SOGI community of practice videos for your reference and continued learning. So I just wanted to point that out before we get started here. So, so for this first concept, the most important takeaway here is that there's a distinction to be made between sex and gender. Sex is usually characterized as biological, relating to chromosomes, sexual organs, and hormones. And intersex people may be born with multiple kinds of sex organs or chromosomes. And so you can see that that's not even necessarily a binary in under sex. For gender, what we're meaning when we say gender, it's referring to more socially constructed roles and behaviors that may be more masculine or more feminine. And this is relating to the roles that we play in our daily life and how we characterize ourselves in that way. There's also, as you can see, there's gender non-conforming people who don't see themselves in one of the more masculine or feminine ways, gender expressions. And so as you can see, that this is a very nuanced topic, and we want to make sure that there's a difference that when we go forward in our communications, that there's a difference between sex and gender, and that things are not black and white. Next slide, please. Some gender identities included in the SOGI standards that you may not be familiar with are here, and we have linked to the glossary for some other terms, but the ones we'll focus on today are non-binary. This is a gender identity that's neither exclusively feminine nor exclusively masculine. So this is someone who sees themselves outside of the gender binary that we so commonly see in our society. There's agender and no gender, describing a person who identifies as having no gender or does not experience gender as a primary component of their identity. It's important to also include questioning as a gender identity, referring to a person who that describes a person's state of exploring, developing, or changing their gender identity, because these things definitely can change over time. Next slide. So a gender identity, as I mentioned in the prior slide, is referring to a person's inner sense of being a girl, woman, or female, a boy, man, or male, something else, or having no gender. And a gender modality is describing an axis of experience with transgender on one side and cisgender on the other end, with questioning in the middle. So transgender is describing the rejection or expansion beyond one's gender assigned at birth, while cisgender is the complementary notion of one's gender assigned at birth with the as complementary to the gender assigned at birth. So cisgender is referring to someone who feels that if they are a woman, they also have a sense of conformity with their gender assigned at birth, which was also a girl. And so I was hoping that perhaps Marjorie could take away this next section of some additional points to consider.
Yeah, basically this idea, I think this is this idea, the concept of if you're non-binary, you can identify as non-binary and also cisgender, and you can identify as non-binary and transgender. You can identify as a woman or a man, and it's transgender too. So gender modality is not the same as gender identity. And it's important to keep it separate. When we mush them together, we run the risk of telling people that the only identity they can have, for example, is a trans man and not as a man and transgender. So that's the point we're trying to make here. There are two different constructs. Alice Dina also put some more information in the chat. Some people assign non-binary gender or agender at birth. And also many of the sex categories are also socially constructed. But this is the big thing, is this idea that gender identity and gender modality, they're two different constructs. That's really the main thing we want to take away here. And back to you, Colleen.
Thank you. Yes, I will go through a few, some more info on sexual orientation and some sexual orientations that are included in our SOGI standards. And again, please refer to the glossary for a more extended list on these topics. I also want to point out, actually, one more note I see in the chat from Dr. Dino. Some people are assigned a masculine or feminine gender at birth, but come to understand their gender as non-binary or as agender later in life. And so all of these are really important and more nuanced points to see in the chat. Sexual orientation describes how a person characterizes their emotional and sexual attraction to others. And so some of the orientations included in the SOGI standards you may or may not be familiar with include pansexual, which refers to a person whose sexual orientation is emotionally and physically attracted to people of all gender identities, or whose attractions are not related to other people's gender. Asexual describes a person who experiences little or no sexual attraction to others. Next slide, please.
I just want to make a note before we move forward. There's a more comprehensive glossary online in the folder. This was just a few, but if you're unfamiliar, please go to the glossary. And so now, before we're talking a little bit about the SOGI standards, how and what, I thought it was important to start first with, we didn't just magically, put together the question. We went through a pretty comprehensive process, starting way back in 2018. Online, you'll see the results of that work. It's 3 pages. Today in this RAC, we're really focusing on what's on page 1 and a couple of things on page 2, but page 3, when you go into it, is really best practices. It's out of scope for this RAC. So back in 2018, we convened a SOGI data collection work group. The group consisted of external stakeholders, mostly, who interact with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and other LGBTQ plus folks, community and health systems, many of whom identified as LGBTQ plus themselves. we had many clinicians in the room who were working with transgender folks, and it made us think we needed to start thinking about the SOGI data collection standards in terms of medical and clinical settings first, because that was the most complicated, where people were falling through the cracks because the names weren't in alignment, or the sets used wasn't in alignment. Insurance claims were being denied because of a mismatch between what providers might have had and what the insurance company has, that sort of thing. Then in 2019, we developed a process. We expanded to focus on systems involving eligibility, benefits, and other social services. And this is where our colleagues in ODHS, Matt, and previously another person, they really took the lead in thinking about, for example, our Medicaid system, our eligibility system, which is relied a lot on, what names, what I just said, names and sets. And since we use some verification, identity verifications, and so they needed to know what to do. So we got our heads together and figured out what would work through a process there. And that is what's also reflected here. So the process in developing the standards, of course, it started with a very detailed literature review, hundreds of articles, hundreds of sources. The people on our committee, we have people from Legacy, Outside In, OHSU. We surveyed all of them. What are they using now? What questions are they doing now? How are they doing SOGI? We looked at the SOGI standards using certified EHR systems. And then we did community engagement in 2019 and 2020. 2019 was in person, and then 2020 was an online survey due to the pandemic. But it was statewide, and we got a fair amount. If you click on this link in your PDF, or someone can put it in the chat. You can read more about the community engagement process. From this, we created the 3 sets of questions, but I mentioned, figure 1 on page 1. These will be required demographic questions proposed for all settings. And page 2 is a menu of options that are more content specific, that in most of these questions respect for communications and/or for data matching verification issues that might occur in systems involving insurance and/or eligibility for services. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Appendix A is best practice, which for example, it's dangerous to assume that just because how people say what their sex is and what their gender identity is, that what preventive services to provide. You need to do a body inventory, and so that is what is in Appendix A. And it was this was mostly done with external stakeholders. It's the best practice. The names and matching for the one system was made by ERG members and ODHS also. And it seems to be working. During the pandemic, our friends who were doing COVID, they wanted to implement SOGI. They didn't want to wait for the RAC in 2023. They wanted to implement. And so these standards that we came up with late in 2020, early 2020 finished, has been in COVID data collection process since 2020. And then in the one system, we added the gender identity in April 2022. Understanding, of course, that based on what we come up with in this RAC, that though how we ask the question may change in the future. But they didn't want to wait for the RAC, so they went ahead and started. And that's one thing I should mention is that the data collection standards are like the minimum standards that folks can always go beyond. We don't say that you can only do this. We just say you need to have at least this, and then you can do more. And it seems to be working. And I wanted to share this slide, and please excuse me, it says monkeypox, and it should be mpox. Wanted to share this to let you sit with it. Leslie, I apologize in advance. I'm gonna need, it's not very accessible here, but in the first diagram on the left, there's a whole bunch of sexual orientation identities. And one of them, there's asexual, bisexual, gay, lesbian, pansexual, queer, questioning same gender, same sex loving, straight in another category. And out of all of these responses, 25 bisexual, it says 15, but it's actually, I think, 150. It got covered up by the other slide, but 150 gay, by 150, over 150, queer 11, 10 for same gender, same sex 11, 12 straight in another category. So what's interesting here is that most of the folks on sexual orientation were said gay, and it was over 150. Not same gender 11 or same sex 11. And this is all alone. So if they pick more than one category, you would see it here. Over in the top right of the PowerPoint is a visual for gender identity. And agender, no gender is less than 5. We suppress if there were 1 to 5. 198 said man or a boy. 6 non-binary, and the rest were under 5. Then when you ask the question about transgender, most said no, over 209 said no, and then less than 5 said yes to transgender. None said questioning. And so if you look at this in terms of thinking about interventions, you know, if we had combined or shortened or changed these categories, it would not have given us much direction for an intervention in terms of outreach. You know, which communities do we outreach here? And so here it is clear that gay men, men who identify as gay, who are cisgender, is the population that was most likely to be reporting mpox. As opposed to, let's pretend for a second that it wasn't gay men, it was same gender 11 or same sex 11. That might mean that a different group of people who don't identify as gay. And that has implications for interventions. So just to share that, again, here are some counts from the repository to show how it's working again since it's been in our system since 2020 from COVID. Many of this is from COVID. You can see that what you see where it says GI woman, GI man, those are the variable names, ignore that. But over 187,000 identify as girl, woman, over 160,000 identify as boy, man, and then 4,841 identify as non-binary. But it's a sizable number of people. 106 identify as agender, no gender. 156 also as questioning for gender identity. 134 other category not listed. And then from the open text question, we also discerned that 38 said gender fluid, 6 said gender queer, and 3 of them said Two-Spirit. Basically, it's culturally specific, but it's Two-Spirit. 43, small number here, 43 said they didn't understand the question. 16 said unknown, and unknown in this context means I don't know because I'm reporting for someone else and I don't know how they identify, which is different than missing. And 2958 said, I don't want to tell you, I declined. So these are pretty good numbers, good to work with. One thing I wanted to impress, this is all a learning combination, meaning it's multi-select. And I know we get this question a lot, what do you do with all that? And this is an example of what you can do with all of that. You can make categories, categorical categories. You can even use the all alone like we did with the impasse. This is all alone. But if you need a categorical, there's ways to create a categorical variable. Depending on your cell sizes, you might aggregate, but you aggregate to the lowest level possible, so it's meaningful. You can study this later, but the main idea here that I wanted to really impress is that it's working and we're starting to be able to use the data. Here's on transgender gender modality. 2,281 identified as transgender, 146 questioning. The rest were 704,509 identified as cisgender. 22,171 is unknown, 2,767 is declined, and then missing is 75%, over 2 million. And it's missing because we didn't ask the question. It's only on communicable disease data that we had, very small, and then it's not in the ones, it hadn't been in the one system until April 2022. So we're talking about a lot of Medicaid members who've never been asked the question. And here's the same idea for sexual orientation. Really want to highlight the main thing for sexual orientation is that while over 20,000 identified as straight or heterosexual, there were people, over 400 people identified as bisexual and as gay, over 100 people identified as lesbian, queer, pansexual, same gender loving, and 35 as questioning same gender loving and asexual, and then 1 to 5 for some of the others. And many of these were not asked a question because they were under the age of 12. 350, over 350 declined. Decline is a valid response. If people don't want to answer the question, they can decline. And then missing was over 200 that were not coded. So it seems to be working. There's some more resources here. This is the takeaway, it's working. What we have is working. And there's ways to deal with the data on the back later to do good analysis to figure out how to identify and address inequities. So let me just check. I think we can go ahead and I'll look at the questions and try to answer the questions, Connie, while you're discussing.
Thank you. Yeah, it looks like we're running a bit ahead of schedule, so that's nice. I'm going to cover some of the proposed changes to the SOGI standards. Next slide. So we are proposing for gender identity that there are 2 main questions. One is an open-ended question. Please describe your gender in any way you prefer. The second question will be a categorical question, a check all that apply. And we have girl, woman, boy, man, non-binary, agender / no gender, fluid, queer, questioning. We also have proposed another option that's based on your ethnicity. Please specify other gender identity not listed. This is to account for Two-Spirit individuals in addition to other categories around the world that we may not be accounting for. Not listed, please specify. And then the three categories, of course, that we put in many of our questions: don't know, I don't know what this question is asking, and I don't want to answer. Next slide. The gender modality question is, are you transgender? Yes, no, questioning, and then those three questions at the bottom, or those three categories at the bottom: don't know, I don't know what this question is asking, I don't want to answer. This allows the individual to self-report whether they're transgender or not. Next slide. For sexual orientation, it's set up in very similar way. So the first question is an open-ended question. Please describe your sexual orientation or sexual identity in any way you want. And then the second question is a categorical question. How do you describe your sexual orientation or sexual identity? And it's a check all that apply question. And here we have same gender loving, same sex loving, lesbian, gay, bisexual, straight, and this is where we did clarify attracted mainly to or only to other gender or sex, other genders or sexes. Pansexual, as we described earlier, and asexual. We have queer, questioning, and then don't know, I don't know what this question is asking, I don't want to answer, and we additionally have not listed, please specify, to capture anything that might not have been listed here. Next slide. So we do have some SOGI questions specific to minors. So we have one question. For individuals under age 12, the requester must ask this following question: are you currently? Then we have a boy, a girl, both, something else, and it's an open-ended question or an open-ended category. It changes over time, and then don't know, I don't know what this question is asking, and I don't want to answer. Next slide. We have toward the beginning of the OERs, it's in a slightly different section. If an individual is under age 18, or if an individual is aged 18 or older but is accompanied by a parent or caregiver, the requester must ask the following questions about the data collection process. Who is filling out this form? And they would indicate whether it's the individual filling out the form, their parent or guardian, or not listed. And then if the individual is filling out the form, there are no further questions. And if the individual was not the one filling out the form, there's a follow-up question that asks, was the individual present when the data was reported? Next slide. Okay, so this is also regarding this information for minors, data collection. So prior to data collection, requesters must inform the individual, and this is kind of our proposed language straight from the OER, so it's a bit more formal language, but requesters must inform the individual and, if applicable, their guardian or caregiver that demographic data is reported to the Oregon Health Authority and therefore cannot be confidential. This is to give them all the information up front before we collect data from them. That data collected from minors in this section may be accessed by their caregivers or guardians, and again, therefore, cannot be guaranteed to be confidential. How the requesters must inform them how the Oregon Health Authority and requester will use the data, the purposes for which the data may not be used, and finally, that the individual is not required to answer questions regarding REALD and SOGI. Next slide. So we also have another question in the SOGI section is, when you were born, what sex was assigned to you? Male, female, intersex, unspecified. We also have a not listed category, and then those three, don't know, I don't know what this question is asking, and I don't want to answer. Next slide. Then name. And if I recall correctly, both the sex and this name section won't be discussed in detail today, but we will go more into detail together in the breakouts at a future RAC meeting. So for name, if REALD and SOGI data collection involves the names of individuals, requesters must ask them the following questions. What first name do you want us to use? What middle name do you want us to use? What last name do you want us to use? And then for the following context, does your name differ from the one you indicated above? You would click a box, yes, it does differ or not. And then these options to clarify what name you might have used in the past for these different contexts would come up. Next slide. Okay, great. So again, that was a quick review. I didn't offer other information behind the proposed questions. I think that's something that we can cover in the breakout sessions. Now we'll hand it over to Cliff. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I want to talk to you for just a moment about our breakout groups. If you could do the next slide, please. So today we're going to be covering 5 breakout groups. We'll be covering some additional breakout groups in future sessions. I'm going to post in the chat box right now a link to our breakout session guide that has our breakout session questions in it. But essentially what's going to happen is we're going to take a break, and when we return from break, we're going to ask you to self-select into one of these breakout groups. And in those breakout groups, you'll take a look at the breakout session guide, and there are specific discussion questions for each breakout room that are relevant to the topic of that room. And we're gonna ask you to pick a group facilitator as well as a note taker. And the note taker is incredibly important for this process, because when you return from your breakout groups, we're gonna ask the note taker to post a summary of the discussion in the chat box so that we can read it off and share it with the group. But perhaps even more importantly, so that we can retain the comments and the summaries from your discussion, because it's going to help inform and guide our discussions in future meetings, right? So the note taker is crucial to this process. So when you get back from break, opt into one of the breakout groups, select a facilitator to keep your discussion on track, select a note taker to post notes after the discussion, and then spend the rest of the time discussing the questions for your group. There will also be staff in each breakout room who will do a brief, very brief introduction. I think some groups have a longer introduction than others, but most importantly, that staff member is going to be there to answer any questions that you may have about the process, or if there are easily answered questions, they might be able to address those for you so that you can focus your energy on the discussion questions. So that's what we're going to be doing when we return from a brief break. We had scheduled for a 10-minute break, which is perfect because it's about 10:20. So we return at 10:30, and then we will have we'll launch into breakout groups when folks return. Yes, thank you. I'm seeing Marjorie affirming that in the chat. Please return, take a quick break, stretch, do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. And then when we return at 10:30, we'll go straight into breakout groups. Thanks so much, folks.
Thank you, everyone. See you shortly.
All right, folks, I am seeing that it is 10:31 on my clock. So yes, if whoever is currently controlling the Zoom, if you could post the links to the breakout groups for us. I know we have several folks who
Actually,
are asking for.
they don't need links. They will get a message saying join the breakout room.
Yep.
Right. Yep.
I'll
That's
go
what
ahead and I'll go ahead and open them now. Okay, they're open.
It's self-selected. Go to the group that makes most sense for you. We know that not everyone, we can't be in two groups at once. So if there will be an opportunity in the large group to add, and also in the next session. It doesn't mean you have to stay in the same group in the next meeting. So just make the best choice you can, and then share with staff anything that you want to make sure the group you want them to know. Also, you can private chat us, and we'll make sure the moderator has that information to share. Thanks, everyone.
I'm seeing that some people do not see the pop-up for breakout rooms.
I can assign folks if they're not seeing it, if they want to tell me which one.
Yeah, same here. So if you all who I think Nick, Katie, Sally, okay, Nick, you want to join the race and ethnicity group?
Race ethnicity, got it.
Great. Okay,
Thank
Sally
you.
wants to join the language and communication needs. I can do that one.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and then Katie Harris, which group would you like to join? And I can assign you. It seems like Dr. Dino found out how to join. Okay. Great. Okay, Ethan, is there a room that you would like to join? That's okay, Shan. We're just glad you're here. Thank you.
Yeah, it just seems like, I mean, I probably would just listen, so I'll hang out.
Okay, Leslie, Katie. I believe it's just Leslie and Katie. Would you like me to assign you a room? Which room would you like to
Looks
go
like
into?
Leslie said disability.
Oh, okay, great. We'll do that. Okay, it looks like it's happening right now. It's not going through for some reason, but it might take a moment.
No, for some reason this is not joined. So are you seeing what I'm seeing, Colleen?
Yeah.
It's like grayed out.
Oh, okay, never mind. I think I know what to do. Hold on a sec. Okay. Okay, Marjorie, I moved Leslie to disability. So Leslie just went to disability. I was able to do it based on your BIP. You're on mute.
Is Marjorie there now though?
Okay, Marjorie just
Yes,
went.
perfect.
Yes. All right. Okay,
Got
I'm
it.
going to join Race of the Sea.
Okay,
See you
thanks,
in a moment.
Colleen. Okay. Kim, do you want me to assign you to Marjorie's room for captioning? Or,
Yes, that'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you.
all right, I'm gonna go ahead and do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
All right, folks, welcome back. I think we have just about everybody back now, or yeah, I think all the rooms automatically closed. So I do ask that folks who were note takers take a moment and start with the topic of your breakout group, and then post your notes from your discussion, because I'd love to share verbally some of the highlights from some of those discussions before we move forward. I'll hold on for a minute or two while we wait for some of those notes to come in.
Would you like the files to be uploaded? Because I took a Word document.
I think it would be best to just paste them in if it's not multiple pages. If it is multiple pages, then yeah, I'm not familiar with the file upload systems on Zoom, so I'm not sure how that would work, but we could give it a try.
I'll put in a high-level summary and then paste the Word document.
Perfect, I appreciate it.
Or upload the Word document.
It says message too long, so I might have to upload in multiple chats. Is that okay?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to start with reading some notes from the race and ethnicity group. Let's see, so we're have heard no disagreements with Latin, but have heard some objections to Latinx. Some agreements with adding the whole slash series of A, X, and E, but ensuring that there's direct input from the community. Yeah, seeing lots of discussion over the slash series. So thank you for that. Limited representation in this particular group. Yep. Let's see. I'm scrolling down to make sure I'm following the correct bits of conversation as these are posted in pieces. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so also discussion about including African and Latinx and recognizing differences in populations. Which is crucial. That's exactly the kind of feedback that we need and are looking for, right? Because the mission of this whole thing is to be able to identify those differences in populations and identify those inequities. Question about where Haitian identity is being included. These are very detailed notes. That's great. Yeah, so then there's the question, so the race and ethnicity group took on also the question about the inclusion of a Jewish category as well. There's been expressed interest from Jewish communities for a specific Jewish category. Seeing some comments here should be added as a standalone category, but also some questions about how it interacts with MENA, as well as MENA not being currently well represented in the categories. Excellent. Let me scroll back up and do some of the conversation about, we combined the sexual orientation group with the gender identity and gender modality group because we only had one participant in the gender identity group. The discussion there was largely some concerns about the UDS system mapping and questions about whether UDS requires the questions to be asked in their specific and particular way, and what that then means for the crosswalk, right? Because the crosswalk is built and designed to go in one direction, and there was some interest or concern expressed about the potential for the crosswalk to go in the opposite direction because of FQHC's reporting requirements. Let's see. Other things from the sexual orientation. Yeah, a question about how two-spirit shows up or doesn't show up, and when and how. Let's see. So I am going to continue on for the sake of time. I know there's a lot here. I don't think we're going to get to touch on everything. Let me go to Heather Wilson. It's perfect. Yeah, I'm seeing Marjorie's posted a place for those Word docs to go. So that's really helpful. The disability group. First open text question. Yeah, so concerns about the question not giving enough wiggle room to accurately describe oneself. Need to be clear about the definition of caregiver. Seeing in the language group questions or a comment suggesting the order of the questions might need to be changed, moving the questions on children under the age of 5 not being required to answer was moved to the bottom. Excellent. So I want to assure you all that we are going to take a close look at these notes to help guide and inform the discussions that we have in our next meetings and sessions. So we will do our best to ensure that we are inclusive of all of the issues and comments that folks brought up. Could we go to the next slide, please? Oh, perfect. We're already there. Oops. So
I think we could stay a little bit more on the debrief, just a little bit more. For example, for the language question, I think there's some things we can explain right now. Like, and I don't know if it was explained, but the question on children under age 5, we don't ask the language questions if they're under age 5. And so it's not a question. It just was moved down to explain in the rules. But on the template, like, how the participants would see or the data collector would see, they would see at the top, do not ask if under age 5. So you have to distinguish the difference between what is in rules for saying in a very legalistic way, this is what's required and what do you do with this? And then it points, section 2 points to as per section 3 and so on. That's in the rules. But in how it plays out in terms of online or in a paper base, it's based on what's in the rules, but it won't present that again, like that thing with under age 5. It would just be a prompt at the top to say, do not ask if under age 5. So just to be clear about that. Interpreters, I would be curious, was there general consensus that we should, I'm just going to throw it out in the, is there general consensus for the language group that we should have the interpreter questions? Did you receive in the last 30 days or in the last year or the last time you asked, did you get it? Was there general consensus on that?
Hi, this is Chanel. I was in that group. When we were talking about it, it makes sense. It because we were talking about how it's the patient or member's perception and understanding if that were really happening, and we're collecting that. I mean, I work for a CCO, so I know we collect that information and provide that, and that's just a different lens, like, data point, factual, this is what we provided versus what was interpreted or perceived to have happened. So I think it's great to collect that. We did have concerns though, where if this is only being asked once a year, it's just looking at that one instance, and if that's even if someone even had an appointment in a relative time, to recall that information. There's been concerns about questions like this being asked on other surveys. I know it comes up with CAP surveys a lot as well, but there is value there. So if it's just a different way to gather that information and think of comparing what's really happening versus what's perceived to be happening from a patient or member's point of view, then that is valuable in having that included.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And even if there's a disconnect, disconnects are good information, right, to see what's happening. Because patient care and patient feelings depend on the disconnects. Thank you. And I guess I would ask another question I should have asked first is, did it make sense to have the triage question first, right? Do you speak a language other than, or use a language? That way the rest of it could flow more smoothly. Did that make sense?
Are you talking about the question about at home, do you speak a different language? Yeah, so we were talking about that as well too, how it depends on the setting, like the care setting in which you're receiving interpreter services, or you might need it. So it is great to know that information, but then being mindful depending on who actually is doing this screening. Is it a provider? Is it the health plan? Is it OHA? And there might be different needs. It might be different needs based on the intensity of the conversation that's being had. If you're talking to someone that it's critical, they need surgery, life-altering surgery or something like that, might be different than just collecting demographic information. So knowing what they're comfortable in and speaking a language, one language at home, but they might still be comfortable speaking English in other settings. I thought it was great having that question first and then doing a deeper dive into the different types of settings or situations where you might need different languages.
Well, the main purpose of that question from our vantage point was skip logic, that all the other questions, if they said just English, they only use English at home, then we would jump over all the other questions, but having a multi-select as it is right now for home language was making it hard to put in skip logics on online surveys. So if there's a reason that we should not have that for skip logic reasons, it's good to know. We can come back to that in the next RAC and dig into that more. So giving a lot of focus to language, but let's go to another group. Why don't I do disability real quick, since I was reporting on that. So the question for disability was which of the open tests should we have? Because all the other questions have open tests. And what I also shared is in 2013, we proposed open tests, but it fell off in the end. So it's funny how we coming full circle now. So suggesting open tests for disability. And understanding that not all the disability questions are capturing everyone who might be experiencing disablism. It's not 100%. They think about 95% it works, but there's still a group of people who are not captured, particularly people who are autistic and other processing. They may not be captured. So having an open-ended will help fill that in. But which one? And the point was made, one option was just open tests, like please share if, so on. And the other option is, do you share? Yes, no, and then please share. Do you identify as, and then please share? And it was pointed out the one with the yes, no seemed more data driven. It may shut down input, and that the first option without the yes, no thing would give you more wiggle room for people to explain. But related to that, what also came up was, well, what would providers, what would others do with the open tests? And I think that's a good question, because we get that for race, ethnicity, and SOGI. What do you do with the open tests? And I think we can do a quick demo on that in our next RAC. as an overview to show what we do, because we do use the data. Particularly, we have software, and with the advent of AI, there are many ways that you can take and use open text and put it into a format that's actionable. What was the other thing? There was a note for about caregiving, that caregiving has different definitions and it's legal. And so we need to be thinking about what that means for us. So I think that's more on the SOGI side, you know, who's in the room and if they're a caregiver, and even in the rules. So we need to take that back and explain more what we mean by caregiving, make sure that we're using the right definition. Did I miss anything? I don't think so for disability. Okay. Thanks, Nick. And also I didn't explain that usually I do is identify the deaf and hard of hearing. So the disability is where my expertise comes in. There's a lot of people who do not experience a disability or identify as having a disability, but they may have functional limitations. So the whole point is who are more likely to experience disableism? That's the point of the questions. So, okay, moving on. And that's just sharing more about open text. Thank you. And there's a question about skip logic for these and others. Nick, would you be willing to share about skip logic? Your comment about skip logic, or in the shadow verbally?
Thank you, Marjorie. I think I'm mainly concerned. I actually share Chanel's, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Chanel. Okay. I share Chanel's thoughts on that. And I also think it's important for us to understand language at home, not just for services in clinic or in care settings. I represent kind of the more social work side of this space. And I think it's important for us to understand endangered languages, especially, and the way our community is relearning what has been lost through colonization, immigration, and how that strengthens culture and how that can strengthen clinical and other outcomes as well. And I'm thinking too that it's an opportunity to connect participants with each other if participants are willing, but if that's a separate question, it's not here today. But if we use skip logic, it kind of makes a lot of that much harder.
Thank you for that. And also, I just realized when you were talking about endangered, we have a really, we have a 7,000 plus language list that we, in our data dictionary, that in the one system right now, for example, that if someone starts typing, they see the various options, languages that show up. And it includes many of the indigenous languages. And it's been amazing. We're seeing so much more granularity since we implemented that in April 2022. Yeah, it's amazing. So we can share a little bit more about that. Let's see what other questions. Let's go back. I also see mode of interpreting services. That's a good one to keep thinking about. And then for SOGI, I understand it might be good to have another cost map, you know, from here to here and here to here, that we can get that moving for the next meeting. Yeah. And then I think most of the remaining responses were around race, ethnicity. And for that group, Amy, if you're willing, would you want to just call out a couple of ones that you would want to share with for discussion here? I know it's in the chat, but there's so much in the chat.
Sure. I think I'm just going to refer back to my notes. High level, I think it's fair to say that there was pretty general support for adding the Latine to the Latin OX question, since there are a lot of folks that either have a strong identification with Latine as their choice and particularly are uncomfortable with Latinx. There was a little bit more nuance there, but I think that was the crux of it. In terms of, sorry, I accidentally closed my notes. Reopening that. I think around the question of question 2 of including Afro Latino AX. I'm probably just going to say Afro Latino here for consistency's sake. That also there was general consensus for including that, because for assorted reasons that seems to be a demographic that is not currently captured in the current questionnaires, and also probably does suffer from or does experience erasure and exclusion as a purpose of that. There was a little bit more nuanced discussion about where it would be included. We were being a little bit cautious about recommendations, since I don't believe anybody in the group identified as Afro-Latino. So we wanted, the same thing with the above question, that we wanted to make sure that we weren't speaking for other folks and that there was more inclusion. And then talking about, some other nuances of identification there. Moving on to question 3 with Jewish identity. Again, there seemed to be broad consensus about including Jewish identity as an ethnicity category on the questionnaire. We had some discussion about standalone versus subcategories. We didn't have a ton of time to get into the nuance, but generally speaking, because of the diversity of identification within Jewish ethnicity, and that's my own personal identification, so that's where I can speak a little bit more nuanced, that because of that diversity, that there did seem to be support for having it as its own standalone category with options for self-identification, as well as some of the major sub-ethnicities, for lack of a better term. And we were also acknowledging that in general, Middle East, North African identity isn't generally well represented at all in these categories. So recognizing a need for that. And then also at the end, I think particularly to question 3, but I think this applies to all the questions that we were being asked to consider, was making sure that we were clarifying our objective of making sure that we were able to analyze for health disparity, because that is our ultimate goal and the reason for categorizing these questions. So I think that was a very quick summary of our discussion, and feel free to chime in if I missed anything or if there's something you want some clarity on.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. I think what this is bringing up is our next set of questions for the next RAC. For example, back to the Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latino SA is, where would it, what group would it fall under? And how would it roll out? Do we put it in 2 places or just 1 place, or what? So that would be probably a question to focus on next time. And then was there general consensus for adding Jewish identity as an ethnicity question?
Yes, there definitely was consensus around Jewish identity being represented on the form, and generally as its own category, as opposed to what I believe the proposed draft is, which is sub identities of white and Middle Eastern, if I'm not mistaken, just to better capture that, even though those are common identities amongst Jewish, that there is much more diversity. We want to make sure that we're capturing Jewish as its standalone identity and also capturing diversity within Jewish identity.
Okay. So the challenge, I'm always thinking ahead, like to the OMB roll-ups that people have to do and the HUSA and all of that. And how does this play out? Go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, thank you.
Nick had some clarification in the chat too.
Thank you. There's I made a couple points about capturing the diversity of Middle Eastern, North African ethnicities. Jewish is 100% part of that, although I don't in any way object to the notion of a Jewish identity that's not under European or under Middle Eastern, North African. I'm an Iraqi Arab American, and there are loads and loads of ethnic groups there. And it would be inclusive to offer these as categories. We're definitely part of Oregon. Another point I want to make about race and ethnicity in REALD is that it doesn't, to my mind, seem to do a good job capturing categories of ethnicity which emerged coherently before the existence of modern nation states. Jewish is an excellent example of that, but so is Roma. So are probably most nomadic peripatetic ethnicities like Bedouin or Irish traveler and similar. Just something to think about there. Yeah.
Thank you. Who is this? Okay, so we will have more on this. We will have different breakout session questions based on all of this today. The other thing that's time, we have to figure it out. We may combine with streams like disability and language so that we can have another breakout room that gets into names and sets and privacy, which becomes another, it's more complicated, but I think for disability, we might be pretty close to wrapping up and hopefully language too. But that will be our aim, is to try and get consensus and move on where we can, and then open up the discussion to like privacy and SOGI and minors and children. Let me see. So we will have I think Cliff and Colleen, I'm turning this back over to you too.
Yes. So the next steps for the, I noticed actually, Alexis, you've got your hand up. Do you have another point to make? Okay. Okay, just making sure. So the next steps for the REALD and SOGI RAC. The next 3 meetings are here on the screen. Our very next meeting will be December 1st from 9 a.m. to noon. Another one in December from 1 to 4. And then we will have another in January from 9 to noon for any remaining SOGI related issues, and possibly even another to wrap up any loose ends. So the next task could be, based on your breakout session, could be reading up on other resources shared in your group, thinking over some of the questions, concerns, and comments that you've already made as a group. And we will be reaching out with reminders and other materials that you might need in advance of the next meeting. Cliff, please add anything I might have missed and take it away.
I don't think you missed anything. The main thing is, the last thing is that invitation for feedback there on the last slide of the what went well today and what could be improved. So we invite you to respond to those prompts in our chat box. So again, as we're reviewing the chat between now and the next meeting, we can use your feedback here to improve the process. Just as we're reviewing the notes from the breakout rooms to inform future discussions and questions as well. So please, before you leave us today, take a moment or two and give us a little bit of feedback. Seeing that Marjorie already has some feedback there, which is great, based on experiences that some folks have had already, so that's wonderful. But yes, overall, thank you all so much for your participation today, for your input today. As I think we've said multiple times, your input in this process is what helps us to ensure that we are developing rules that are equitable and inclusive and help us to reach that goal of addressing health inequities through this data collection. An asynchronous workspace, I'm seeing that from Nick. Can you say, say a bit more about what you mean by that?
And so we're officially adjourned. The live stream will be ended. We'll stay here for a little bit more to get the feedback in the chat. Thanks, everyone.